This is session number 2 of 6 summer sessions at the Power Table, where we are looking at the relationship between tradwifery and tech feudalism, and we are looking at dismantling that relationship. We consider it a noxious relationship and not much help to anyone except the oligarchs, the tech bros, and the people, the new feudal lords. So let me just do a quick review of session 1 so we can move on to session 2. And I'll do the quick review and I will answer also the core questions that we asked in session 1, because we didn't get to it much last time because we ran out of time. In session 1, we answered the questions who, what, when, where, why, and how, because we set the foundations for the conversations we'll have over the next 6 sessions, the next over all 6 sessions. And so we talked about what tradwifery is in brief. We talked about tech feudalism. Let me just quickly remind you of that. We are not looking at tradwifery as a positive. We identified 2 different kinds of tradwives. They are the quote unquote real tradwives, the ones who actually live the lives where they are denied access, autonomy, agency, and where literally their work is taking care of home and family. And then there are the internet tradwives, the glamorous ones that are on our screens every day, making sourdough and baking everything from scratch and milking cows and all of that, but getting paid for it and earning money from it. And the reason why we are looking at this relationship is because this internet tradwife has come out of tech feudalism, is being pushed by tech feudalism and by the algorithms which are set up by and serve the tech bros with a very specific purpose. And we're going to be looking at that as we go through the sessions. It's a very particular reason. None of this is by accident. So we're going to look at why tradwifery, why it's happening now, what's driving it, who's driving it and funding it, and what its intended end is to be. So let me do a quick review of that, of session 1, and then move on to, and then I'll answer, like I said, the core question that we didn't get to complete the answer to in session 1. So what we did in session 1 was we established that the tradwife that we're talking about is not the offline pastoral rebellion against modernity that is being set up to be. She, the internet tradwife, is a highly optimized online product. She works on the digital plantation for the tech lords, the technological feudal lords, feudal technology lords. She works. She's selling a life of sacrifice. Have more children than you can afford. Have children, have them young, get married early, devote your life to your husband and the family, and that will be it. And you're serving, you're fulfilling your natural and right purpose on earth. But she's working and she's been to college. She's educated, she travels, she has her own money. So the conflict for us is that it's duplicitous, it is deceitful, it is deceptive, and it is not helpful to women. Later on in this series, you'll also hear how we explain that this tradwifery is not helpful to men either. It doesn't support men's development, men's advancement. We also established that tradwifery is being pushed by this system, and we talk about this system because we also made it clear that we're dealing with systems here, systems and archetypes, because we're not dealing with individuals. It got to the point where these are not individuals who have decided this, and that is part of what comes up in the conversation a lot. People identify individuals and then say, so you're saying that this one person made that decision? No. How systems work is that they find ways to perpetuate themselves. Let me just give you a quick example. Between my undergrad and my graduate school, I worked with young girls in care. And there's one particular evening I was at, and I was the education coordinator for the organization. And so after school, I was at one of the residences, and there was one young girl, child really, she was 13, who was being disruptive and just being really, 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 really troublesome. And so at one point I did the planned ignoring. I just stopped engaging her, stopped talking to her. And she didn't stop immediately, of course. And then I heard one of the other girls who'd been living, this was a pretty new girl, she'd been there just a very short time. One of the older residents, older in the sense that she'd been at the house longer, I heard her say to this other girl, you might as well just stop because she's not going to answer you. When she starts doing that, just stop. So I did not have to, I set up the system. I did not have to reinforce it. I didn't have to pass that information on. Other people, they know the system, and that's how the systems perpetuate themselves, because people within the system pass it on. Those are the enforcers, for example, which we'll talk about. That's an enforcer archetype, and we'll talk about that. And that's what happens, which is why I want to make it clear. We are talking about systems. We're talking about the system of patriarchy. We're talking about the system of the algorithms and the system of the what Bell Hooks calls the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. We'll talk about those four segments and how they're attached to, how they affect women, what they mean, and how they play out in this this feudalistic technological space. So let me answer this question. You see, there are like three questions. The core question of session one was, what happens when patriarchy and tech feudalism converge? Why has the tradwife become the cultural ideal promoted precisely at this intersection? And what does its rise reveal about the new architecture of power that's shaping women's lives? And I'm going to try to be as rigorous and precise as I possibly can, because we are not treating the tradwife as a simple internet meme. It is not. It's not a retro aesthetic choice either. It's not traditional either. What we're going to do, however, is look at it as a feature of a massive tectonic shift in global power, because it's been driven by power and a lot of money and a lot of energy of all kinds, a lot of resources of all kinds, not by accident. None of this is accidental. So when patriarchy, which is the oldest system of human domination, for example, converges with tech feudalism, the system's newest and most technologically advanced form, they don't fight, they optimize each other. Tradwifery, patriarchy and tech feudalism optimize each other. They come from the same root, and they're going towards the same goal. Historically, capitalism required a labor market of individuals. Tech feudalism, however, operates on a model of enclosure, extraction, and rent seeking. So the neo-feudal lords, the digital platforms and the oligarchs, they act as digital estates. So the tradwives online work in these estates. They don't manufacture goods, nobody here, but the oligarchy, they rent out access to their land. Their land is the internet space, the algorithms, the social media feeds, the payment processing rails, yes? And so within the stage we are at of neoliberal capitalism, public and social infrastructures, healthcare, childcare, elder care, mental health support, nursing, counseling, those are being restructured. Some of them have collapsed, some of them are being reassigned, redesignated. Nursing and counseling, for example, in the United States now are no longer professions. They're being reduced because mostly women are nurses and counselors. This convergence solves the structural crisis by privatizing the burden of care. So if you drive women back to the homes, then you don't have to worry. The system won't have to worry about paying childcare, ensuring that people earn enough money to pay for healthcare and things like that. Since the goal is to reestablish the traditional patriarchal family unit, and the system has designated the woman as the ultimate uncompensated shock absorber. She's the one who will absorb the work, the extra work. Women are already doing that unpaid labor. Now, what the system is driving us towards is all of that. Women not having to do this other labor. And they're selling it to us as soft life. You know, women have been struggling so hard and burning out in the system, but the system was not set up for women. It's not because women can't do the work. They're making it sound as if they're telling us that we are too soft. And well, we talk about which women are soft and gentle also. We get to that. But the idea is that women are not, we just don't have what it takes. We are meant to be soft and protected and gentle and not have to worry our tiny little brains, our gentle little brains, our soft brains with things like power and decisions and money and things like that. And women are being told, we're being pushed back into the space, into the home, into the house, and separated from any ability to develop ourselves and express ourselves and contribute to humanity. It's got as far as the places men are beginning also to push for taking away the vote, women's vote, and we're going to talk about that today. So let's get into session 2. We're going to talk about archetypes first, and then we'll get to the what we call the erasure of the franchise, taking away the franchise of the vote, and the ultimate silencing of women. Like systems, archetypes are not specific individual women. Archetypes are ideas, if you will, patterns, ways of being, of showing up in the world that different people have at different times. The fact is that none of us is any specific, is only one archetype. In my book, The Women, the Patriarchy Co-opted, we speak of 8 archetypes, 6 plus 2. I'm going to run through those really quickly, and then we'll talk about the archetype that is the tradwife. Carl Jung defined archetypes as universal inherited patterns and images found in the collective consciousness. He calls them primordial models. The mother, the shadow, the trickster, and the hero, someone that he had. And archetypes shape human behavior. Like I said, they're not specific women. There are particular ways of behaving that recur across behaviors and stories and myths and dreams and so on. In our case, we have, in my book, The Women, the Patriarchy Co-opted, I identify eight archetypes. And we're going to talk about them very briefly. I'll tell you what they are very briefly here. And we're going to find that the one that we're talking about mostly, when we're talking about tradwifery, is the enforcer. The tradwife, the internet tradwife, is an enforcer. So the archetypes of my book are the enabler. The enabler is the mother figure, the one whose son does no wrong, and she covers for him and she fixes things for him and makes his life easy. The enforcer is the woman at work, or sisters, mothers sometimes, who the women in a man's life who enforce behavior of other women, which is what the tradwife does. Her job is to encourage women to come in and to enforce behavior, how you dress, how you walk, how you talk, how you behave, the fashion, tradwife fashion, and the colors, the pastels, and so on. Tradwives have a way, they look a particular way. There's tradwife fashion. That's part of the enforcement. You're supposed to look like this. So those are the women who police other women. The enforcers police other women. And then, of course, you have the consort. The consort is the wife who makes her husband look good. We see it all the time. The men, the patriarchs, we call them in the book, misbehave. Does all kinds of things he's not supposed to do, but the wife stands by him because the respect, the family, and the image, and so on. She protects that. You have the fixer. The fixer is the one who is the fixer is, in colloquial terms, would be something like the office wife. It's the personal assistant, the other woman who fixes when he does things. So where the wife stands by him when the media, for example, if he's a public figure, the media is all over him. The wife stands by him and makes him look good, and people look at her, and she is meant to soften the image. The fixer is the one who pays the monies, who quiets the other people who are causing trouble. The fixer. The obsession is a kind of the sacrifice. The obsession is the woman that this flawed creature who's the patriarch wants to have. He's obsessed with her. We're going to be discussing, we're looking at people in media and so on, public figures, that we have a little bit of license to talk about. We won't, we look at where we see that showing up in media, yeah? And we look individually at the way it shows up in our lives. But the ones that the man's obsession, which often is what drives him to misbehave, then somebody has to cover for him, and the wife has to stand beside him, and the fixer has to fix. But the obsession, he cannot own the obsession. Then we have the antagonist. The antagonist, before that, we have the sacrifice. The sacrifice is the one who pays, the one who ends up broken. And we see it all the time. For example, and we don't have to call names here or anything, but you see this all the time. Women have stood by them, they've done all the struggling, and they've arrived at the pinnacle of their career, wealth and fortune and fame and so on. And then the marriage ends. She has served her purpose. She's sacrificed. Yeah. And the other examples of women who are sacrificed to the patriarch also. We'll talk about those. Then we have the antagonist. The antagonist is the woman she is the advocate, the protester, the one who's out on the street, the one who is protesting the misbehavior, if you will, of the patriarchs. So right now we see it playing out all over the world. Women are out on the streets fighting, protesting men's decisions, the decisions of the patriarchy. The other archetype, the other one of the two who work against the patriarchy, but that the patriarchy manages to subsume, to pull into itself, to prove that it is a system that allows activity, is the opponent. The opponents are, for example, lawyers, like human rights lawyers, for example, who are out there fighting the system, and they get to win, but they don't actually get to change the system. And they're getting to win, they're being allowed, the fact that they can challenge the system so deeply and even win some of their cases allows the system to say, see, we're not so bad. We allow challenge, but the challenges are never enough to shift the system. So those are the archetypes of women that we talk about, the women the patriarchy co-opted. And I specifically call them feminine archetypes, female archetypes, because we are talking about women's resistance to the patriarchy, not general resistance to the patriarchy. There are men who resist patriarchy, not very many, but there are some. But we are looking at women's resistance to patriarchy and how women engage with the patriarchy. So these archetypes are females. Now, the tradwife is an archetype that was not generated out of anything except the modern tradwife, quote unquote, which is an oxymoron, of course. But the internet tradwife was generated by the patriarchy, not even to support the patriarchy. Well, partly to support the patriarchy, but partly to pull women away from matriarchy. And we're going to develop this further also. The argument is that the women in resistance in the last 100, 200 years who have pushed through and got the vote and abortion care and health, reproductive rights, and the right to go to school, the right to an education and to run a business and to be out in the street and to have power and to do politics and all that. Women struggled and fought for those rights. They got them. Patriarchy fought back really hard. It's still fighting and has found a way now that it thinks gives it an edge to push women back out of these spaces. That is the tradwife. Like I said earlier, the argument from the selling point, if you will, from the system is that life is hard out here. Power is a dirty thing. You don't want to get involved in that. So just, go home, take it easy, just go home and we'll look after you. We look after you at home. You just take care of us at home. We take care of everything here. And it's got to the point where they are stripping away women's rights to reproductive care of all kinds. They are stripping away women's right to education. Women have been struggling for powerful positions in industry and commerce and politics and have made some gains. All that is being pushed back against in really, really big ways, really, really powerfully, really relentlessly, aggressively. And it's been done by these other archetypes, these other male archetypes of the patriarchy, the broligarchs, the bishops, the proxies, and the wardens. Now, so the patriarchy now has identified five archetypes working for it, specifically for it. The difference between these archetypes, which I'll list in a minute, and the female archetypes, which are in that I just mentioned earlier, is that the female archetypes, the women's archetypes, are women finding ways to survive within the patriarchy, finding ways to stay alive. And we're going to look later on at how to dismantle that, how women can disengage from that. These other five that I'm going to be talking about are they're set up by the patriarchy specifically, deliberately to perpetuate it, to propagate it, to strengthen and empower it. Though the bishops, I call them bishops because they begin with religion. And I don't have to tell you much about that. Again, we'll dive deeper into those as we go. But religion has determined how women live for a long time. It was religion that began with women should not be in spaces, women should not be preaching, women should not be participating in powerful things, women should serve, women are lesser human beings and should serve the male. Then and then we come to the broligarchs, oligarchs, feudal lords, but today we call them broligarchs. These are the men with power and money. I mean, it used to be mining and shipping and the enslavement of people that made people their money, made men their money, that continue to, sadly. Those are the ones whose money pays. They align with the bishops because the bishops are the ultimate patriarchs. Think about it. The Orthodox churches, the Greek Orthodox churches, the Russian Orthodox Church, their priests, the high priests, are called patriarchs. In the Catholic Church, in the Anglican Church, their priests are called father. Right? You can't get more. They could not make it any clearer. And they influence the broligarchs because the control that they allow, the control that they have, the power that they have over groups of people is very attractive to the broligarchs. And so whether they believe what the religion says or not, they align with the bishops for this power. The proxies are the politicians, the legislators, those who, again, are funded by the broligarchs and who are supported and pushed and threatened even, if you will, because you get threatened with hell and fire and damnation by the bishops. And they make the laws that support the bishops and the patriarch, the stance of the bishops and the broligarchs, or refuse to make the regulations that would control the bishops and the broligarchs. Those are the proxies. And then the wardens are the other men who perpetuate the system because they live with the notion that they're just one step away from the top. That's a lie that the patriarchy tells men. You can be up here. You cannot, any one of you can be up here. You just, and so they live with this notion that they could be as powerful. But of course, they never get to be as powerful. But with that mindset, they maintain the system and they do this power thing in the home, which is what causes so much distress and harm to women, which is one of the reasons why we have a problem with the tradwifery, because locking women in homes too often ends up being harmful to women, physically harmful in all kinds of other ways. What's happening right now is that the bishops are pushing back against women's right to be out, because the religions, many of them, insist that women are less than men and should not be seen, should not be powerful, should not be engaging, and definitely should not be challenging men. They have found the space right now. It's a good time for them right now to push back against that, because the broligarchs don't want that either. The systems have broken, the systems in the world have broken down, so many of them in so many ways, that there's this fight between socialism and democracy and communism, and and what that has done in the social space, if you will, is it has made it so that governments are not willing, they're pulling back. Many governments are pulling back from resourcing and funding healthcare, childcare, mental health support, education, things like that. Governments are saying that we can't afford it. Pensions, social security, governments are saying we can't afford it, we're not making the money. The oligarchs are making trillions of dollars. They're not willing to pay people the wages that would allow them to pay for their own health care and childcare and so on. So it's easier, and the churches want women back under the heels of men anyway. The religions want women back under the heels of men anyway. And so together they form this very powerful group. They form this very powerful group that is systematically, relentlessly, ruthlessly pushing against women and women's rights. And the tradwife is their super archetype. Because the tradwife, I want us to understand, the tradwife is the internet tradwife is being presented as the ideal. Go home and here's what, it'll be lovely, it'll be pretty, and all pastel shades and well-behaved children, and organic food just out there, and you can spend your day wandering the farm and taking your time and baking sourdough bread. Sourdough bread has become sort of so they're pushing women, they're giving women the idea that that's what tradwifery is. They also, the other aspect of that, which is not spoken very much, is the realization, is the fact that this tradwifery is being presented specifically for white women. So it is also creating stress between women, between the groups of women. Tradwifery is the white supremacist piece of the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. The tradwives are almost exclusively white women, and there's a reason for that, and we'll also discuss that as we go. The relationship between women, among the groups of women, Black women, white women, Latina women, Asian women, Mediterranean women, all of those, indigenous women around the world. We'll be looking at those relationships and how those are fractured by the patriarchy, by capitalism, by white supremacy, and by imperialism. So all of those, those four male archetypes, and then the tradwife archetype, makes it so that the tradwife is, for our purposes, she is the super archetype. So I started to say earlier, she is available, she is at work, she is serving not just at home. Women are being sent home. But know that women cannot all be sent home. The system wants women out in the workforce, but they want them to be tradwives in the workforce. They want them in the workforce behaving the way women behave at home, just responding to what they're being told, when they're being told, who you can talk to, when you can talk to, what to do, following orders. You're not rising, you're not leading, you have no power. You're here to serve the men at work. So the tradwifery idea, the tradwifery archetype, will also be at work in commerce, in politics, in science, in academia, everywhere, in technology. It's already there. The few men who are there are not rising. Very few of them are rising to the top. In finance, there are very few women rising to the top. It'll be even worse later because they're fine with women doing the groundwork. In politics, women have always done that. And that works for the men. They could not win without women, so they don't want women at home. Now, the other argument that we're going to make about tradwifery, this particular tradwifery, is that it also does not serve men. One of the arguments against tradwifery is that depriving women of the opportunity to work and earn money is depriving the home and putting women at risk, because when there's a single earner in the house, what happens when something happens to him? He leaves. Men leave all the time. He could get sick. He could die. He could just, anything can happen. He can lose his job. And then what? The family's in crisis. So what that does is it puts pressure on the men, so they are no longer able to make decisions so now they're restricted now in how much autonomy they can show, how much agency they can engage. They're limited because they have to always be thinking, if I lose my job, my family has no, what will my family do? I can't give this job. Even though it's not paying much money, I have to stay. So they are losing power also. The vast majority of men are losing power also. And that's part of what makes this whole thing so interesting, on the one hand, fascinating, but also so unwise. So unwise. It does not help anyone except the few men sitting at the top. Right? So that's our argument about the archetypes. So there are those 8 feminine archetypes, which are the women who are being co-opted by the patriarchy, women who are trying to stay alive, women who are biding their time, and the ones who are fighting the patriarchy. And then there are those 5 archetypes that the patriarchy has created to serve itself. We're going to be digging into those in great detail as we go forward. So now, the risk around tradwifery for all of us is that tradwifery could become the defining archetype of our time. It could, because the resources behind it are so vast and deep and so relentless. And because all of these decades and centuries, women have not had access to the resources that allow us to be our strongest selves, to push our strongest fight. Let me put it that way. And so it is quite possible that tradwifery could, because it's getting airtime, it's getting internet time, it's getting algorithm support, could become the defining archetype of our time. And this is because it represents the ultimate victory of what we are calling aesthetic sedation. Aesthetic sedation. This calm, quiet, beautiful pastel aesthetic of tradwifery over what is reality, over structural reality. Because we live in an era of macro instability, and terrifying in many ways. Look around you, the wars, climate destruction, genocides, famines, all this fight against women. There's economic instability in waves. Gas, no gas. War, no war. There's anxiety around the climate. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Storms and hurricanes and typhoons and so on getting more frequent and getting stronger. In the Caribbean, we learned a phrase about hurricanes. June too soon, July stand by, August a must, September remember, October all over. We grew up in a time where the idea was, where the science was that September was a good, hurricanes came, they'd start kind of slowly, September, and then they'd go away. Now, NOAA, a few years ago, changed that. And hurricane season no longer now begins in June, which used to be too soon anyway. Hurricane season now goes from May until October, November. It's spreading out. And the hurricanes they've gone from category 5 to category 6. Typhoons in the Pacific also are strengthening because the ice cap at the poles is melting. And so the seas are rising, and there are islands in the Pacific that are they're being buried. They're being I was gonna say buried. They are being submerged. People are losing their lives and livelihoods and their history and culture and their artifacts and their monuments and their ways of life. And yet there are people who are saying it's not. There's no. We will do nothing to stop it. And the people who are doing it are the people who have the most money in the world, the capitalists. The capitalists who believe that money is all that matters. They want to be billionaires and trillionaires, and that's all that matters. And in the process, are destroying the world. And of course, the other thing that we're working with is the rapid alienating advance of the tech feudal digital landscape. The corporate promise of women having it all, which has exhausted a whole generation of women, left women burnt out and are working double shifts and so on. So you're working on the corporate clock and you're also working the same work at home. And women are beginning to listen to this. And since the system's not changing, because what it needs is a different system. But this particular system is so powerful and so set that women, some women are thinking, let me just, I'll do what you say, I just go away, I just step out of it. But you don't step out of it, you just take up a different role within it. And that's what we're talking about here. You take up a different role within it, which is what tradwifery is offering. And because it's a kind of escape hatch. It takes out the grueling, uncompensated labor of social reproduction, packages it in soft pastels and linen and sourdough starter and all that. And it's the defining archetype because it is the system's most successful psychological operation. It is the most successful psychological operation to date. It sells exhaustion designed as liberation. Subservience is packaged as self-care. You can look after yourself, but not to do that, you give up everything else. So it is what I saw online and written as, described as the beautiful face of a brutal economic retreat. I saw that written somewhere. Tradwifery is the beautiful face of a brutal economic retreat. Now, tradwifery is also a calculated reactionary challenge to the matriarchy. A lot more women are talking about matriarchy nowadays because we're looking for an alternative to patriarchy, and matriarchy centers itself in people. Patriarchy centers itself in things, in money, in power, and fails to understand that power shared is power expanded. Matriarchy understands that. And so the patriarchy is setting up a challenge to the matriarchy, and this is what tradwifery is. But it's not in the sort of in a very sort of grassroots way that it's being presented to us. It is instead a calculated challenge set up by the oligarchs, of course, engineered by the algorithm, and is bankrolled by the oligarchy. It's funded very, very heavily and is legislated by the proxies. So there is this trifecta plus the wardens, the enforcers, who are all militating against the matriarchy. So when we talk about the matriarchy in this particular context, we're talking about the hard-won collective networks of female institutional, political, and economic power built over the last century or so. Tradwifery directly challenges this by framing those collective victories as a mistake. Women, we shouldn't have, because look at what it's done to us. It's made us tired, and it just worn us out. Ignoring the fact that women have been doing this work within a system set up, not only not set up to accommodate women, but set up specifically, precisely to exclude and limit women. So women are not operating within the system the way men are. Women have to work twice as hard, 10 times as hard. And then, of course, that puts pressure on other things that women want to do. And tradwifery tells women that, that this agency that we want, this agency and autonomy, is a burden. It's not. And financial independence we fought for is meant for men. It's masculine hustle. Men are to do that. But if we want peace, We want peace. Just yield to patriarchal protection. The men will take care of us. They'll protect us from themselves and take care of us. But of course, we know how that works. Tradwifery is a reactionary counteroffensive which is designed specifically to dismantle female solidarity. It is designed to keep women separate from each other, fighting against each other to survive within the patriarchy. That's what those 8 archetypes of women do. They police one another, enforce this, enforce that, fight against the system, and so have no time to support one another, to combine forces and fight the system that's harming them. But when women retreat from public boards and political offices and commercial spaces, economic tables, and go back to the isolation, the silos of the single family kitchen, women are effectively breaking our own union, our own chance at unifying for strength and survival and power. What it does is it replaces collective power with individual dependency. And we're going to talk about that also, because individual dependency weakens women. And individual dependency, when the patriarchy sends women back into the home, what it also does is it isolates women from one another. Yes? And that makes women weaker. And that is what abusive men do, for example, to the women to their women. They separate them from support systems, so they become not just dependent but vulnerable. So the patriarchy wants women indigent, because we won't be working, so we won't have any money. Dependent, we won't have money, so we need to depend on them. We have no recourse, no vote either, so we have to depend on them. And they want us weakened, silent, not being able to speak. That's what abusive men do to the women in their lives. They shut them away, lock them off from support. That's what patriarchy is asking us to do. That's what the tech bros and the tradwives are asking us to do. To give up all of this and become indigent, dependent, and silent. Now, the workhorse, it is one of the archetypes, I suppose, of this is the workhorse. That's what they want women to be, the workhorses. Now, workhorse has to be strong, of course, but a workhorse is kept silent. There's a bit placed in the horse's mouth so the horse can respond when it's and it pulls heavy loads. It has no time for anything but to pull that load. And the patriarchy is asking us to be that. The workhorses for it. And what we get? Protection and peace and quiet and silence and loneliness. When women choose this, the minute they do that, the contract changes. The door to the enclosure is locked. When the workhorse voluntarily accepts the bit that is meant to keep it quiet, the loss of political agency, she's relinquishing control over everything else, trusting the driver, the man, to keep her fed and safe. But the reality is that under tech feudalism, there is no benevolent lord. There's no such thing. When women voluntarily give up their financial sovereignty, their independent networks, and their vote, they give up their political franchise, they render themselves structurally, actually mute, no longer have a voice. And so they allow themselves to be entrapped. Because when the contract breaks, when the patriarch leaves or gets sick or loses his wealth, like I said, or becomes abusive, the woman has no legal, political, or economic, or even social levers left to pull. Because she's been isolated, separated. She can't strike. She can't go slow or strike from work. She can't negotiate either, because she has surrendered her options for exit. So she has to stay there. And when women converted from being sort of active agents of history into passive private assets. They belong to somebody. They become the uncompensated shock absorbers of this failing system infrastructure, and they're working around the clock. They never stop working to maintain this household asset, which doesn't work for them, which does not serve them. So we're at the end of session 2. We have mapped everything. We know all the parts. We know all the facets, all the factors. We know what we're working with. Sessions 3, 4, 5, and 6 will be the work sessions where we decide what we want to do about these. So there's a lot of information here. Some you probably already know. Some new connections that I hope you understand and might even have already come to on your own. What we do next is we figure out what we're going to do about them, how we will address these, the how we will look at these, the how we will engage with them. So I will see you in session 3. The diagnostic phase is over. Sessions 1 and 2 are diagnostic, it's over. The strategy phase begins now. I'll see you at the table.